Hi, I'm Mike Morse. Welcome to another episode of Open Mic. This time we are back in the office. I'm super excited to be back here in our studio that we built for Open Mic. We have a heartbreaking tale today. It's another wrongful conviction case. This time we have Julie Baumer on, who served 4 years and a couple months in prison for a crime she absolutely did not commit. And we have with her Sarah Miller, who is a juror in her second trial, to talk about that trial, to talk about their friendship since this all went down. And I'm super excited to have both Julie and Sarah on Open Mic. Welcome, ladies.
You never know who you're going to see.
Be one guy one-on-one my whole career.
What you're going to hear.
We got a lot of desperate people in the city.
Or what they've got to say.
When you can take people inside of a crime.
That's what you're going to hear on my podcast, Open Mic. Find it where you find your podcasts.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Hi.
Hi. Don't be shy. Are you shy?
No.
Okay, good. You don't seem shy.
No.
So look, you guys, I know you're fans of Open Mic and you've watched the episodes. We talked about that before we came on, and you know, it's probably been almost a year that I've been involved in researching and talking to people who've been wrongly accused and wrongly incarcerated for many years. And we've done lots of episodes since then to try to dissect it, to try to figure out what's going on. We've had prosecutors on, we've had other jurors on, we're trying to get to the bottom of all this, but it is absolutely heartbreaking. Your story is heartbreaking, Julie. Anybody who's heard your story, if they have a feeling bone in their body, has to feel for you and feel that our system is broken. So for those of you who have not heard about you and who have not read your story, we have to go back to the beginning. 2003, your sister had a baby boy who she could not take care of, correct?
That's correct.
And you, with your loving heart and your family support, decided, I'm going to do something for my sister. I'm going to step up. I'm going to adopt this baby and raise this son as your own. Is that all true?
Yes, that's correct.
And why? Tell me about that decision, and tell me, take us back 17 years as to what was going on.
Well, you pretty much summed it up quite well. My sister was unable to care for Philip, and so before he was born, we decided that to keep him in the family.
Before he was born?
Yes.
So you hadn't even met this child, and you agreed to take... What was going on in your life that you were able to... I mean, you were in your 20s.
Yes.
What kind of work were you doing?
I was a loan officer for a private firm, and I was just,
High school graduate? Did you do any college before that?
I did some college, yes.
So you're just a normal, upstanding person, and you said you would help out your sister, and your parents were on board, and other siblings?
Yes. My other siblings, they were all on board. They were married with children already. I was the only one not married without children, and so it seemed like a good fit. I was already co-parenting for her older son, her firstborn.
For your sister's old, okay.
Right.
So
right.
So the adoption thing is a permanent process. So was there no hope in the family's mind that she was going to be able to raise this child eventually?
That was a decision that she had made, unfortunately, because of the lifestyle that she had chosen to live at that time.
So that's a good question and that I missed. She agreed to this adoption.
Yes.
She was not in a coma. She was not. She participated to allow you to adopt her son.
Yes.
And the boy's name was born. His name was Philip.
Yes.
And he wasn't healthy, was he, at the beginning? Was he premature?
No, yeah, there was some complications. They had actually induced her labor 2 weeks prior to the due date. It was a decision by a 1-year intern. Her regular doctor was actually on vacation, and he was hospitalized for a week after birth because he was failing to eat, and I was told that he was suffering from acid reflux. Now, mind you, I didn't have any legal say-so, so I was getting everything secondhand from my sister.
Well, acid reflux for a baby is common. My baby's had that.
Sure.
And that's not an uncommon thing.
Sure.
So you took the baby home after 1 week?
Yes, after 1 week he came home.
And your house
he was on a strict feeding regimen, like every 2 hours there was a certain amount of cc's they wanted him to be able to keep down.
Was your sister involved at all at this point, or was she that bad off that she was not at the house?
It's not that she was that bad off, but she didn't reside with me, so there would be no reason for her to be there. She would just take on the role as an aunt, if you will.
But I know that I'm trying to break this down between week 1 when you got the baby home and week 5 when you took the baby back to the hospital. In those 4 weeks, describe what was going on with baby Philip.
Well, basically, he was just
Normal baby?
your standard newborn. He went to his pediatrician every week for a wellness checkup. He was, I don't want to say he was thriving 100%, but for being a newborn just out of intensive care for the first week of his life, he was moving on. He was gaining weight and filling his diapers and finishing the bottles and whatnot.
How did you find motherhood for those few weeks?
Well, I naturally I'm a maternal woman. I changed my first diaper when I was 6 years old. I come from a large Catholic family,
Okay.
so my older brother, being 10 years older than myself, he started his family, and so I.
So you were around babies early.
Very early. Very
So
early.
tell
it was
me, describe.
natural.
I'm trying to get from you. Describe how were those first few weeks with him home?
He was my living doll. I mean, I was constantly taking photos of him and changing his little outfits, and it was just, it was.
Fabulous.
It
And then
was
did you
good.
have family coming over to help and to?
My other siblings, they resided out of the state,
Okay.
and so yes, my parents would stop by, and I had people from, at the time I was with my Kiwanis group, and I had friends stopping by and whatnot, and I'm not out showing him off. It's too early for
Sure,
that, but
right.
yeah, I had people coming through. Sure.
And then around week 5, what happened?
Around week 5, there wasn't any like overnight change, if you will. However, I distinctly remember it was a Thursday afternoon, and I had gone in to see my parish priest for a baptismal class, or actually to arrange a baptismal class. And he was the one that actually, because he had met Philip a couple of times, and he said, he doesn't, he looks a little, maybe he's like coming down with a cold or something, or he just doesn't, whatnot. So I picked up Philip and, okay, well, he stirred around. He was sleeping, but he stirred around. So when we got home, I went to give him his feeding. It was around 7 p.m., and he didn't keep that feeding down. And then throughout the evening, there was just a series of events where things were starting to decline in regards to, like, he wasn't eating, and he was becoming more and more lethargic, if you will. So by morning time, I called up my father, and I said, listen, I've taken his temperature, no temperature, I've given him a tepid bath. I don't know what's going on. So he said, well, call the pediatrician, what are you calling me for? So I called up the pediatrician, and I informed her that he hadn't kept down a feeding in close to 12 hours, and I was concerned about him becoming dehydrated. So she invited me to go into the ER. She said, why don't you take him into the ER so they can start an IV on him, and then we'll go on, and I'll come in and we'll assess the situation.
So which ER did you go to?
At the time, it was Mount Clemens General, which is now Macomb McLaren in Mount Clemens.
And I'm going to go off track for a second, but who named the baby? Was it you or your sister?
I named him
That was your name.
Philip Francis Xavier Baumer. He was going to grow into that name.
It's a big name.
It's a big name.
So you take him into the hospital, as any good mom would do. And what happened in the ER at Mount Clemens General?
Well, I didn't have legal custody of him, so I had to pick up my sister.
Oh.
And she accompanied me to the ER, and she took him in. When I went to go park the car, and when I came back in, they had already taken him in the back, and there wasn't too much information that we were receiving. We were out in the waiting room for maybe 15, 20 minutes, and then they came out and they told us that they didn't know what was going on, but they knew that they wanted to get him to Children's Hospital, and they wanted our authorization to transport him. He had no external injuries, no obvious signs or reasons to be, he was just lethargic. They couldn't understand. So they sent him down to Children's Hospital, and they just started doing drawing blood and doing lab work.
Do you follow the ambulance, or you drove in the ambulance?
No, I followed the ambulance. And so then when we got there, it was, by the time any doctor really came out to talk to us, it was close to maybe 10 p.m. And she said, we have him stabilized. It could be a virus of some sort, or it could be an infection of some sort, or, we don't know. She said, we're just waiting on results from lab work.
And you and your sister are still there. Mm-hmm. Your sister was still with you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And so she said, we'll go on and we'll just go home, get some rest. We'll call you and come back in the morning. So we went back the next day. Unfortunately, at that time, that was a Friday evening, the next day from the Thursday that things started going, south. Victoria decided to take off my sister. She didn't tell anyone where she was going or whatnot, but sure, she turned her phone off and she was unavailable for pretty much the rest of the weekend. And so when we were at the hospital that Saturday, again, it was just...
who was with you?
My parents, they met us.
You and
up
your parents
there.
went that Saturday morning.
Mm-hmm. And so it was just another day of just waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And then that Saturday evening, one of the nurses tending to the children or to the infants, she was doing a search. She was measuring, the children and weighing them, and she noticed that the circumference of Philip's head had grown to an alarming rate where it was, I don't remember the exact figures or whatnot, but it was enough for her to contact the radiologist and order an MRI or whatever they did to whatnot. And that's when they saw bleeding in the brain. And so they had decided that they were going to do an emergency surgery to relieve the bleeding in the brain. And Sunday we went back to the hospital and just a waiting game. And then it was Monday morning, that Monday morning that I received a phone call from the sheriff's department, and they asked me if I would come in to interview.
So let's back up for 1 second before we get there. So all weekend long, how were you feeling with your 5-week-old, soon-to-be legally adopted son going through brain surgery?
Oh, it was devastating.
Were you a wreck?
you're clutching your rosary and you're just...
Right, you're a wreck.
Right, exactly.
But the surgery went well?
He survived the surgery, yes.
Okay, and so the indications were that he was going to be okay after that surgery when they told you Sunday that everything went well in the surgery?
Well, they just said he was stabilized. There wasn't anything, because they still didn't even have a diagnosis as to what was going on.
Besides bleeding on the brain.
Right.
And so Monday morning, which sheriff's department was it?
Macomb County.
So Macomb County Sheriff's Department calls you and said, will you come in and talk to us?
Yes.
And
because Victoria had taken off that Friday evening and was gone the whole weekend, I thought that maybe she had gotten herself into some issues or trouble or whatnot. So I went in there thinking I was going in to tend to whatever issues she had gotten into. Completely blown away. And it was like maybe 20, 25 minutes into the interview that I actually grasped what I was actually doing there and what they were suggesting or implicating.
So you go into the sheriff's office. Do they read you your Miranda rights?
No.
And they just start interviewing you about what?
Just basically, who I am, the family dynamics, asking about Victoria, asking about Philip, asking about my parents, basically, and then after all of those questions, then they started, have you ever hurt any children, or did you drop Philip, or just questions where it's like, what are you asking me?
And
this
you're answering
because,
the questions like,
right.
No. I mean, had Philip had any injuries in the 4 weeks you had him home?
Of course
Did
not,
you ever
no.
hit his head on a wall by mistake? Did you ever drop him by mistake? Did he ever roll off the bed or couch by mistake?
These are the questions.
Of course, but but none of that happened.
No. In fact, I was blown away because I'm like, why are you asking about Philip? Because I thought that you wanted to know something about Victoria. And they were like, well, we don't care about Victoria. We care about Philip because he's the one in the hospital. And I'm like, well, they don't know what's going on with him. And then that's when, that's what we're trying to get to the bottom of.
So did they come clean during that interview and say, we think that?
No, they just said that they were trying to gather information and pretty much they were just trying to gather information.
How many hours were you there with them?
Probably between 1 and 3 maybe.
And then you went where after that?
And then I went home and I attempted to go to the hospital, and I was informed that by a security guard that I wasn't permitted in because I was now a suspect in a criminal investigation.
And so that's the first time you learned that you were a suspect in a criminal investigation from the security guard at Children's Hospital?
The police, when they were interviewing me that morning,
well, you're a
like
smart
I said,
person. You put two and two together, but did they tell you were a suspect?
They just said that they were trying to gather information.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean anything. That doesn't mean you're a suspect.
No, if I felt like I was a suspect, I think I would have ran and got a lawyer. And
Probably.
Right. Sure, I would have called you, Mike. Yeah,
she should have.
Why not, right?
Maybe we wouldn't have been in this mess.
Tell me about it.
But so then you go to see your son and they say you can't come in. What's going on in your head? What do you do? Who do you call?
I'm just blown away. I'm absolutely blown away. And so I remember I called my father immediately and I said, they're not letting me in. And so he said, they're not letting anybody in right now. And then he informed me that actually he and my mother were due to have an interview. They interviewed everybody in the family. They interviewed everyone in the family.
Before you were charged?
I wasn't charged for several months. And then I was re-interviewed a second time, with the good, bad, with the good cop, bad cop little thing that they had going on. And then I begged them for a polygraph. And then they invited me in for a polygraph. And that was a horrific ordeal. They claimed I failed it, and I begged them to retake it, and they denied me of that. So,
so they said you failed a polygraph.
Mm-hmm.
At any point during these months, did you talk to a lawyer?
Well, I had retained my attorney for the adoption, and no, I didn't feel that there was a need to talk to a criminal attorney for anything. But it wasn't until several months later, February of 2004, when the adoption attorney, Mike Stepik, he gave me a call, a very good man, and he says, I'm afraid I'm going to have to, what's the term, recuse myself or take myself away myself from dealing with you, and I'm going to suggest that you get a criminal attorney, which I don't handle, I do family. And he said, the sheriff's department is giving you 72 hours to turn yourself in, and they're charging you with first-degree child abuse. And if I thought that things were a nightmare before that point, that's when...
What month was Philip born?
August.
And what month did you get this call for?
February. And he was in the...
So you're 7 months later.
Mm-hmm. Well,
and you've gone through 2 interviews with the sheriff's department. Mm-hmm. You didn't call a lawyer for either of those.
No.
Because you thought there's no way you did anything wrong. There's no way anybody could believe you did anything wrong. There's no external trauma. There's nothing going on here.
Well, I didn't feel like there was...
Right. I hear you. And another reason I ask a lot of these questions is because I'm hoping people are watching these and listening to these podcasts and learning.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
And that's one reason you ladies are here.
And anyone can be a potential juror. So yes, that's
a potential
good.
juror, a potential victim, and I it's not my job to educate the whole world, but obviously, in hindsight, you shouldn't have gone in for that second interview without a lawyer. Nobody should talk to the police without a lawyer. And
that's correct.
That's just a simple thing.
Don't learn it the hard way.
You probably knew that, but you forgot it, or you thought. A lot of people think I'm innocent. I can talk to the police. I can talk to the sheriff. The sheriffs are the same as the police. Okay, so your adoption lawyer says you need a criminal lawyer. Who did he recommend someone, or how did you find your criminal lawyer?
I found my criminal lawyer by actually contacting a friend of mine from high school, and her younger brother had gotten in trouble. Found it this is obviously several years before, but I don't know, he had gotten in trouble. There was like a joint in his book bag or something, and so he had gotten arrested at school for that. And I remember his parents had to get a bail bondsman. So I called up my friend Christine, and I'm like, who was that bail bondsman that your parents got for Danny years ago? And so she gave me his number, and I told him what was going on, and he said, oh, I've got a buddy who's a lawyer. And
What was his name?
Elias Mawad.
And he's the one who handled the case throughout the trial?
And yes, and he actually apologized after the fact. He admitted to dropping the ball on several occasions.
Okay, so we'll get into him in a second. So you were arraigned within a few days for, was it first-degree child abuse or what?
Yes, first-degree child abuse.
And you pled not guilty. And what happened next? How many weeks, months later was the
Like
was the
18,
first trial?
Yeah, it was like 18 months had gone by.
18 months from birth. I mean, your child was 18 months old.
No, 18 months from the time of my arrest to the time of my arraignment or arrest to the time of my trial.
Got it.
18 months
Wow.
had gone by.
That's a long time. Now, you were not sitting in jail the whole time, were you?
No, I was out on bond.
Okay.
But it's ironic that every time my Elias would put a motion in for discovery for something in the hospital, those orders would be lost. And so then we would have to go back to court and re-get the orders for discovery. And
Who was your judge in Macomb County?
he is retired now, James Baronet Sr., ironically for both trials. He would be a fun one to interview.
He's got a pretty good reputation, I think.
Oh, yes.
I mean,
Well,
I've
they
been
both do, the son and
his
father.
son's a judge. Yeah, these are. I mean, these are
Right.
good judges. So your lawyer. So during these 18 months, he's preparing a defense for you, allegedly.
Yes, and I kept telling him at the time, before we actually knew what was wrong with Philip, collectively, my family and I, we were dissecting everything from Victoria's pregnancy to the time of the birth, and even the time that he's spent at the hospital after the birth. And from the research that we did as lay people, we knew that with her water being induced, with the labor being induced 2 weeks prior to the original due date, she was given too much Pitocin. And we figured, okay, well, he must have sustained injuries due to too much Pitocin. And so that's what we were trying to get from the hospital, that proof that she was given Pitocin. And those orders, miraculously, finally we got them on the fetal monitoring strips. Unfortunately, they weren't admitted because they were submitted too late. There was a lot of shady little errors leading all the way up to the conviction.
Did you feel like your defense attorney was?
Well, I kept telling him, we got it, and he just kept dismissing it. He didn't. I retained his services, but Mike, you got to remember, I was in my early 20s, so I wasn't a millionaire or anything. I retained his services. He told me, he said, you're probably going to need some experts, but then he started throwing off dollar figures going into $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. When you're 24 years old, those are figures that you don't want to hear that.
So he said we should hire experts, and you said I don't have that money, and he said, okay, then
Basically
we're going to trial
not.
without an expert.
That's right.
He didn't realize that he could petition the judge.
That's where he claims he messed up.
So every lawyer knows.
Exactly.
Every lawyer should know.
Exactly.
And every witness should know, and every defendant should know.
But I think he just.
Let me just finish the sentence, just in case somebody is listening. that if you can't afford an expert, going up against the state with lots of experts, the state will pay for an expert for you.
That's right.
Just like they'd pay for an attorney. If you fired Muad and said, we had a breakdown of a relationship, I need a different lawyer, the court would appoint you one for free. You know that now.
Yes.
So he failed to get you a expert.
Mm-hmm.
He allowed you to go to trial with just you and him, and who else testified on your behalf?
We did have, what was her name? Janice Oven. Now she was an expert, but she wasn't an expert in what we needed. We needed a radiologist, and we needed like a neurosurgeon. We needed people that were going to go up against the two main witnesses for the state, which was the radiologist and the brain surgeon.
Right, which is typical. Sometimes, I mean, some of these cases have 4, 5, 6 witnesses.
Right, and then I wasn't allowed any character witnesses. That was it.
You weren't allowed?
You know, he went ahead and he said this is basically the battle of the experts, and he said
you didn't have any experts.
I know. Tell me about it.
And
So
now
it
there's
was
a law.
basically me against the state, or me against these two doctors. So my word to the jurors, which I wasn't allowed to testify.
So you
either.
didn't testify.
No.
Well, you were allowed. You chose not to.
Well, he advised me not to.
So your lawyer said, and did you fight him on it, or did you say, okay, you're the expert, you're the lawyer?
Exactly. I just, yep.
Did he ever had a case like this before? Did you ask him if he ever had a shaken baby case? Or
I didn't even know what I was getting. I didn't even know what I didn't know what he was what they were. It wasn't even until at some point in the trial that I actually heard the term shaken baby. I mean, I kept asking everybody, like, okay, if they're charging me with first-degree child abuse, what exactly are they saying I did wrong?
That's a good point.
No one ever could tell me. And then I never even heard the term shaken baby until at some point in the trial.
So were they were using the term shaken baby syndrome back in 2004 was the trial? Or 5?
2005, yes.
Because now they've changed the name to abusive head trauma.
That's right.
But that's a different story.
Right.
SBS got a bad rap, so now they got AHT, which is getting a bad rap. But so what month in 2005 was this?
September.
And how many days was your trial?
It was. It went on for about 4 weeks.
4 weeks. Mm-hmm. So you had no witnesses. You called one witness on your behalf?
Yeah.
What was her? I don't understand. What was her role? What was her title? What was her occupation?
She was some form of doctor, but she wasn't. I don't.
She wasn't a radiologist. She wasn't a neurosurgeon.
Right.
She was not somebody who was skilled to talk about SBS or
right.
abusive head trauma.
Anything, right?
So what took so long?
That's.
Did you go every day? Did you go one day a week?
There would be some half days, and then there would be a couple of days off.
So the state called 2 witnesses. Did they call anybody else?
Not that I'm aware of. Or they might have called the foster parents, which were now the adoptive parents.
What did they say?
Oh, they were just talking about the level of care that Philip was.
So tell me about his. We're jumping around a little bit.
Yeah, because we're going back 15 years.
I understand.
Where are the transcripts?
We're jumping around. That's how I do things. We're
jumping around.
Tell me. So by the time you got to trial, which sounds like your child's almost 2 years old at this point. Mm-hmm. How was he physically doing?
I remember from the videos that they showed that he had little leg braces, and they didn't have any audio in the video. They just showed the video. So it was. I didn't have contact with him, so I don't really know what it. But
What
they
is
just
it?
showed like video of him like at physical therapy, getting physical therapy, and I don't think there was anything domestically. It was like just little experts or little excerpts of. I don't even know how long the video was, but it was just like of him.
I get it.
With different
Okay.
therapists,
And
physical therapist.
so after this 4-week trial, you're going home every night, right? You're not in custody.
Right.
Your family's supporting you.
Yes.
Is Victoria at the trial with you?
No.
She was off doing her own thing.
Yes. She wasn't even aware of the trial.
Okay. And the jury comes back. I mean, was there a point, at any point, that they offered you a plea deal?
They did.
What did they offer you?
They did. I think they offered me something to the, I want to say maybe 2 years. Now, mind you, being a layperson, uneducated in that area, if you will, about sentencing and this and that and da-da-da, I remember Elias telling me, Julie, he said, when I first went in for my first interview with him, and he said, you're probably looking at, he said, if you're guilty and you're convicted, he said, you're probably looking at 1 to 5 years, depending on your history, which right now I don't know anything. That was false information, because it was really 10 to 15 years. It wasn't 1 to 5 years. So then he comes to me, and at some point, I think we were halfway into the trial, and he says, they want to know if you plead guilty, you can do 2 years and then just be done with it. And I remember looking at him, and I was almost hurt. But I said, you know what? I said, they took, my kid away. They turned my life upside down. And now they want me to put myself away for something I didn't do. Tell them where they know where they can go. I'm not taking it. I'm not doing this.
So yeah, it's sitting, playing Monday morning quarterback 17 years later, 15 years later. You didn't present a defense. You didn't present a defense, or this lawyer didn't present a defense on your behalf, which is the upsetting part for a lawyer like me. It's upsetting that he didn't take this seriously. I don't know what was going on in his head, and I don't know if he thought he was just going to get off because he had good openings and closing arguments. I just don't get it. But you turned down the plea deal. The jury came back on all counts guilty.
It was one count, but
It was
yes,
one count.
guilty.
There was no options for the jury, and guilty.
Mm-hmm.
And what goes through your head when you hear this?
It was just absolutely surreal. Absolutely surreal. I don't want to say that I was in denial during the trial or at any stage during the legal proceedings, but I tried to, mind you, I was co-raising Brandon, who was the older brother of Philip. So I tried to keep him sheltered from that, and I tried to keep my professional life sheltered from that, because I knew that I wasn't guilty, and I knew that I didn't do anything wrong. And in my mind, I thought, I'm not going to air dirty laundry. This isn't something that you share. I mean, someone's going to realize that they made a mistake. They're going to apologize to me, and this is all just going to blow over, and however that's going to work out, it's going to work out. So I maintained a schedule and worked the trial into my schedule. The day I was convicted, obviously I was taken into custody, but that evening, Brandon had a scheduled dental appointment, and then he and I had an aunt and nephew date for, oh, you did such a good job at the dentist, buddy. Now we're going to do dinner and a movie. War of the Worlds, I remember the movie he wanted to see, some weird alien thing. 7 years old, I don't know, anyways.
Was Brandon living with you?
I was co-raising him, so I had him on some nights, and then his paternal grandmother had him on,
okay.
on some other times. It was nice that I always had him on the nights where he had to go to the dentist and things, but that's fine. It was my pleasure. I mean, that's my sister's kid. Anyhow, and then the next day I was president of my Kiwanis Club. I had a scheduled board meeting. It was I was just ripped from my life.
You just
prepared
thought there
for.
was absolutely no way
No
this
way
jury
that they're
could convict you.
No way.
But at the same time, you seem like a really smart lady. I'm sure you were smart in your 20s. You're doing all these things. You were taking care of kids. You were stepping up, and yet you sat through this 4-week trial, and I can't. And I'm having a hard time realizing that you didn't realize this wasn't going well.
Oh well, I had some doubtful moments. In fact, you spoke of during opening arguments, or you made a comment of opening arguments. Mind you, for the 18 months that we were preparing for this trial, my family and I kept telling Elias, we have to prove that that Victoria was given Pitocin. We have to prove, because he was diagnosed with cerebral palsy. We have to prove that there was medical malpractice here that caused the cerebral palsy. I didn't do that. Julie didn't do that. Medical purposes did this.
Right.
So when I went ahead and Oh, I just distracted myself.
No, it's okay. But you were
Right. So his opening remarks, he says at the end of his spiel, very dramatically, he walks to the jurors and then points over at me and says, "I can tell you that this did not happen on my client's watch." And I just remember putting my hands in my head and thinking, what did he just do to me? Because first of all, you're telling the juror
Something
that
happened.
something happened. And then you're saying that it didn't happen on my watch. So what happened and what didn't happen on my watch? And then if it didn't happen on my watch, then whose watch did it happen on when I'm the primary caregiver? He's in my care the whole time. So
Did he tell your story? I mean, the fact that you took this baby because your sister couldn't, I mean, did your real story come out?
no, and it did, and I don't even know if that came out during the second trial. I there was a lot that was kept from the second jury. I mean, they didn't even know that I had been in prison before.
And if I could just interject,
Hi,
I was
Sarah Miller.
the jury foreman on Julie's second trial, and after it was over, we found out that if we had any knowledge of her first trial, we were not allowed to participate in the second trial. When they were picking jury members, they were asking us, do you know her? Do you have any knowledge of her? Not alluding to what had happened, but
Yeah, I get it.
basically they wanted a completely unbiased, fresh set of eyes
Sure.
for her second trial. Now, I didn't know most of the things that she had mentioned to you about her first trial, and it's just unbelievable how different that was.
You're hearing it for the first time right now?
Yes. For example, she didn't have any medical experts. There were a lot of medical experts at her retrial. There were a lot of character witnesses. She did take the stand. So there were a lot of things going on that
Well, you see a
didn't
difference
happen in the
between-
first trial.
And she had a great second defense lawyer,
I
Carl
had
Marlinga.
several,
Yes,
right? Yeah.
yes.
And lots of others. So we're jumping the gun again. We're all over the place. Thanks, Sarah. I know you're excited to get in on the show, and I want to talk to you. So, you know, that's okay, because the punchline is you're here, you're out. But let's just kind of take this a little bit more sequentially. You're convicted. You're sentenced to what?
I was sentenced to 10 to 15 years.
And the judge could have sentenced you to a lot less.
Well, I believe my sentencing guidelines. I don't remember the exact number, but because I had no prior convictions, it would have been lower.
But he gave you the max.
He gave me the max. And what I didn't confirm with anybody, but I suspected after being inside for a little bit and doing a little bit of research at the legal library is that he probably gave me the max so that if I went out back on appeal and then lost the appeal, they couldn't they couldn't max me out like you're already maxed or something. I don't know. That was just a theory on mine, probably irrelevant.
So, I mean, I got to ask, and I've asked this to...
Oh, it was an election year too, so maybe that was tough. Tough on crime.
Going to prison as a innocent person, innocent woman, people convicted of hurting a baby. I mean, how was that? I mean, try to describe to me what the feelings were, what the experience was like in prison.
It's I can describe it. I mean, some parts are indescribable. First and foremost, when the conviction came, that was surreal. You know, you're just like, okay, this isn't happening. But then you go on and you sort of like pop into survival mode. You know, mentally, you're like, okay, what do you do next? Okay, well, you want to appeal next, so you immediately start on your appeal, and then, you know, being incarcerated. You know, it's really not the way it is in the movies. It's you know, every institution's different and the layouts are different and whatnot, but pretty much, at least from my experience, you know, it's more of a mental breakdown. You know, I remember when I first for the intake day at prison, you're assigned a number, and then that's how you're identified. And I remember thinking they just took my identity. They just took my name away, and they just assigned me a number. And then you're basically told that you're property of the state, and then you're reminded of that, throughout your stay. And then just the sterile, everything's just so uniformed and impersonal.
What'd you do to keep yourself busy?
Well, I did. I walked the yard a lot, but I tried to. I tried to keep a 9-to-5 job, if you will. I mean, there was nothing administrative in there, but I was able to obtain a position with the in-house maintenance, which was what I requested because it was very diverse. You weren't just stuck in one area, and so I was able to consume my time with that. And then I read a lot. I read a lot, and
Make any friends?
Well, I don't know what you would consider a friend in that environment, but I certainly learned who to be cordial with and who not to be cordial with, and I pretty much I stuck to myself. It wasn't an easy process. I remember everybody telling me, don't talk about your case. If you're appealing it, don't talk about your case, da-da-da-da. I was in there a couple of years, and somehow the case had leaked out. So, of course, you go through that proverbial gauntlet line, if you will. Every time you leave the unit or you leave your room or something, you got somebody pointing at you and whispering and, oh, she's the one who cooked her baby, or she's the one that sewed her baby's eyelids. I mean, it's just that psychological.
Did you feel threatened at any point? I mean, did anybody try to harass you, hurt you?
Well, no. No, I never physically felt threatened. I always prayed that, Jesus, put your precious blood upon me and just keep me safe. I repeated that 20 million times a day. And then I always figured that if anybody ever did try to attack me, I'd just jump in a fetal position and hope that one of the COs would come and rescue me or something. But by the grace of God, no, I was never physically threatened. So.
And while you're there, are you at the prison library learning and reading up on case law and realizing?
Yes. As I'm appealing my cases.
Who appealed your case your first time?
I was a court-appointed attorney, which I kept telling her, listen, we weren't able to get these fetal monitoring strips into the trial. We weren't able to prove that my sister was given Pitocin. I'm telling you, this is what's going on. When she told me, which is very incorrect, but she said, well, we can't appeal anything that's not in the transcripts. Well, what's an appeal unless you're admitting new evidence, right? So she didn't want anything to do with it, and she basically just wrote that off. I was denied my appeal, and then I actually asked a lady who worked in the library. She was a fellow prisoner, and she had been there for some years, and I told her what was going on, and I asked if she would write my brief for me and submit it.
And then a couple of years later, I'm gonna go through this part relatively quickly because of time, but
yes,
eventually, University of Michigan Innocence Clinic opened up in 2008. Through a series of events, they agreed to take your case.
Yes.
You were the third or fourth case that they had taken
yes.
At that point in time.
Yes.
And they thought you were innocent.
Yes.
And so they took your case and they filed a 6,500 motion, I assume.
Yes.
And they asked Judge Burnett, right, for a new trial.
Yes. Based on new evidence.
Based on new evidence.
Which was completely off.
Right. So in 2007, your original appeal by the court-appointed person was denied, which seems to happen a lot until places like the amazing Innocent Clinics step in.
Or now the Integrity Unit.
The Integrity Unit in Wayne County you're referring to, and other counties are starting to open those up. We've talked about that a lot in the show. And in 2009, was it Judge Biernat who decided you needed a new trial?
Yes.
Which is an amazing thing.
Yes.
So he basically admitted your first trial sucked and had lots of errors, and new evidence showed that you were entitled to a new trial.
Yes.
And were you in court when he made that ruling, or did you get a call when you were in prison?
No, I was supposed to go to court, but the transport officers somehow they
messed it up.
Yeah, they messed it up.
So you got a call, or somebody told you,
Yes.
and what's
I got
going-
a visit, actually.
What's going on in your brain when they say, "Well, you're getting a new trial"?
Oh, it was like, thank God, like 4 years later, but thank God.
And it's rare. Let's not forget. There's a lot of innocent people sitting in prison.
Oh, but
and
to
what
get
happened
something
you,
that quick, right?
it's rare. And 4 years is too long.
Right.
But better than 40 years or 25 years
Yes.
or 13 years. But 4 years is way too long. And at this point in time, the state, Macomb County Prosecutor's Office, had an option. Mm-hmm. They could have said, she served her time, whether she did it or didn't, we're going to walk away and not try her again. Mm-hmm. Or we're going to try her again because we don't like that this got overturned. We don't like being wrong. We don't like losing.
Right.
Unfortunately, they chose the latter.
Yes.
They said, we're going to retry her.
Right.
Now, were you shocked by this?
Well, yes, but initially, they had Eric Smith and Carl Marlinga had what I was told was called a gentleman's agreement, and that if Baronet realized that there were errors in my trial and realized that the new evidence showed that Philip suffered from a venous sinus thrombosis, a form of childhood stroke, if he said, okay, she's innocent, we're just going to all walk away. When they took me from the prison to the court, and for the judge, yes, I was like, I knew that he was overturning my conviction, but for the actual formal hearing, when he's like, okay, your sentence is vacated, yes, I was present, and I thought I was just, okay, let's move on to, what's going on next. I had no idea they were going to retry me. No idea.
It must have been a blow to the head when they told you that.
Exactly. Because
And it doesn't make any sense. Sitting here 15 years later, or not even 15 years later, 11 years later, it makes no sense.
Right.
You'd already served 4 years. They offered you 1 to 2.
Right.
Or they offered you 2 years. You'd serve double that.
Right.
They should have walked away.
Right, and Eric Smith's claims that, again, that was an election year, but he claimed, he told Dave Moran, he says, I know she's innocent, but I need a jury to tell the public that she's innocent because it's an election year, and I, too, have to stay tough
The Eric
on
Smith
crime.
that's about to go to federal prison?
Yes, karma comes back.
Yeah, it's a karmic thing. Wow. Yeah, I bet you didn't feel bad when you saw he got indicted.
Oh, I was still, well,
So, so now was Carl Marlinga the prosecutor when you were convicted the first time?
ironically, yes, but he
stepped down.
He had stepped down because he was getting ready to run for Senate. So he didn't even know about my case. He claims that if it had come across his desk, he would have questioned it. He would have, whatever. But he claims he didn't even know about my case until my retrial.
Okay, so your first trial, he was the head prosecutor.
Yes.
Who was the prosecutor that tried the case? You remember that person's name?
For the first trial?
Yeah.
Originally, yes, her name was, she actually was fired after the trial. Michelle Brunowski. We would have
Why'd
to
she
look
get
it
fired?
up.
Do we know why?
Well, there was some issues.
Because of your trial, she got fired?
Yes.
Even though she got a conviction?
Yes. She
doesn't
wasn't
make
even at my sentencing. They had assigned a new prosecutor. I know.
It
tell
gets
me,
thicker. The web gets thicker.
The plot thickens exactly.
Okay. So how did you hook up? So I know Dave Moran, the excellent lawyer who runs the University of Michigan Innocence Clinic, and his team of lawyers. How did they hook up with Carl Marlinga to represent you as one of your lawyers in the second trial in the same courthouse that he used to be the prosecutor? He's the prosecutor in your first case. I'm not sure how there wasn't a conflict there, but thank God he was there. Was he your lead trial lawyer? How did that happen? It's mind-blowing, that whole thing.
I know, it's divine intervention.
Tell me
the
how
whole
that
thing.
happened. Do you know how that happened?
Well,
Or did David Moran just say, come on, Carl, help this woman out?
I'll tell you how very quickly. Before U of M even jumped on board, I had been appealing the case, And one Friday evening, I get a phone, or I get not a phone call, but I get a call from the officer. Go to the visiting room. You have a visitor.
Wait, this is why you're still in prison?
This is when I'm still in prison.
Oh, okay.
So So I go in and I go to the visiting room, and there's a Felician, a nun, Sister Lois. She's from the Felician Sisters, and she claims that she had gotten my name off of a prayer list, and she wanted to know about my case. So I shared with her the case and the entirety of what I knew at that point. And so she said, well, she said, I've got a friend, Charles Lugosi, who's an attorney, but also a professor at the Ave Maria School of Law. At the time was in Ann Arbor. And she said, do you mind if I talk to him about your case? And I said, oh, please, 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 anyone who wants to listen. So I then sent him my transcripts. He and his students found merit in the case, but they knew they were way above their head. They didn't know where they were going to turn to. U of M had not opened their doors yet. They didn't know where they were going to turn their head, what they were going to do. Charles Lugosi attended some lawyer dinner function, fundraiser, something, and seated at his dinner table was Jack Kirkwood, who is the husband of Heather Kirkwood, who is a Seattle-based attorney who handles SBS cases pro bono. So through casual dinner conversation, Charles Lugosi's expressing this new case he has, which is my new case, and Jack pipes up and says, my wife is the one that you want to talk to. So he gets Charles in touch with Heather Kirkwood. Heather Kirkwood reviews everything. She says, I have several renowned doctors who will testify. But she said, we need some local people. She said...
Because she's not licensed in Michigan.
Right, but she said, we need local people. So then that's when they contacted Dave Moran.
Got it.
And Dave Moran looked at the case and said, yes, we'll accept this case, and we'll go on, and we'll assist in the retrial. But then Heather Kirkwood and Dave Moran, they were like, we still need somebody even more local. I don't know who reached out to Carl, but Carl had a soft spot for wrongful convictions because of what almost happened to him.
Well, and what happened to him, right?
Right. So that's so
good point.
He went ahead and he took on my case and
was he the one who argued your case?
He
argued the openings and closings and cross-examined witnesses and put on the witnesses?
Right. But U of M, they helped. Bridget McCormick, who's now Supreme Court, she actually...
You had a dream team.
I had a dream team. She
Julie.
was actually the one who gave me direct examination. And then Dave Moran, that was his first trial. He'd never done a trial before, so he got to go up and do his first time thing.
Oh, my God.
Talking
I wish I was in that courtroom.
Oh, it was different. It was different.
Well, you had no idea who all these people were really at that point.
No. In fact,
Dave Moran, Bridget McCormick, Carl Marlinga.
Right.
And Heather Kirkland was there too?
Oh, yeah. Heather flew in, and the judge knew that she was just there to advise.
Wow.
And then maybe about 6 students that were working on the case.
So you went from having a kind of a, I won't call him the name that's in my head, but Elias Muwad, fill in the blank what kind of attorney he was, to a dream team.
That's right.
So,
Divine intervention.
Second trial starts in sometime in 2010?
September.
September 2010. Lucky for you, you had a fabulous jury forewoman, who happens to be sitting right here, Sarah Miller.
Yes, I am.
Hi,
Good
Sarah.
afternoon. Hi, how are you?
You're back.
I am.
So, you've been listening. I know you said you learned a bunch of stuff from hearing about her first trial, the difference between the first trial and the second trial. I guess, had you ever sat on a jury before?
No, this was my first time, and this trial was about 4 weeks, I believe.
Okay, the second trial was 4 weeks as well as the first trial.
Was 4 weeks,
and,
yes.
You heard her in painful detail describe how lousy that first trial was. The second trial feels like it was night and day because there was half a dozen medical witnesses on Julie's behalf. The state probably had their half a dozen witnesses.
Correct.
They had this dream team of lawyers. The prosecution had their 1 or 2 lawyers.
Yes.
So tell me your impressions of the trial, those 4 weeks. How do you describe that?
Well, as you asked me, I had never been on a jury before, and the selection process took all day. They kept asking people questions and dismissing them and bringing other people in, and I just knew the whole time I was sitting in that courtroom that I was going to get picked for this jury. I just knew it. So they questioned me towards the end of the day after we'd been sitting there for hours and hours. And once I was selected, they had indicated that the trial was expected to last 4 weeks. And I think that's why a lot of people were dismissed. There are a lot of people, for a variety of reasons, that are not able to commit to 4 weeks. And one of the main things I remember sitting on that jury is how convincing the prosecution was and how certain they were, the doctors that they brought in, that she was guilty.
Because the prosecution gets to go first, as we know. So
Yes.
Let's just break this down a little bit, Sarah. As you're listening to the prosecution witnesses, how convinced are you that Julie hurt this baby?
I was absolutely convinced, and when we went in to deliberate at the end of the 4 weeks, I thought she was guilty. And when we did our first go-around with the deliberation, I was one of the people that initially voted her as guilty.
Wow. So even after the prosecution put on their 6 witnesses, what was it? What was it that, why in your mind did the prosecution witnesses hold more weight than the defense?
The prosecution witnesses were primarily doctors. I remember a Dr. Ham. Once I heard his testimony, it would have been very hard to convince me otherwise because he was so competent, so seemingly knowledgeable, and seemed so certain that she was guilty. That was, I think, the point in time where I had kind of felt like, yes, she definitely committed this crime. So when I have that in my mind, I'm perceiving the defense in a different way. Because I'm so convinced by the prosecution that she's guilty, I'm dismissing a lot of things that the defense is saying, and I'm not perceiving them as being as knowledgeable or competent or accurate with all of the information that they're providing. In that trial, we sat there for days and just looked at MRIs. You've got one set of doctors saying that this is, look at this child was abused. And then you have another set of doctors looking at the same MRIs saying, this child had a stroke.
Right. So that was not I just want to interrupt for the people who are watching at home and listening. You were going on and on, Julie, that you thought the Pitocin and the cerebral palsy and the legal and the medical malpractice is what caused the bleeding on the brain. Turns out Philip had suffered a stroke called a venous sinus thrombosis, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So through my guess is, correct me if I'm wrong, throughout the months between the release and the new trial, all the experts got together and looked at all the slides and looked at all the MRIs and the medical records and the fetal monitoring strips. I'm sure they got everything. You had a dream team. They got everything. Am I right?
Yes.
They were way more skilled than your first lawyer, and they got everything. And they all got together and said, "This is a stroke. This baby wasn't shaken. This baby wasn't dropped." And so that's a medical condition, but you didn't buy it at first. You eventually bought it, and I'm
Right.
curious how you changed your mind, but I'm not there yet. So did you just think this is a made up thing by the defense, and all these doctors are lying?
No, I never thought that anybody was lying. I think that it was really just debatable about what happened to this child. And if I recall, now granted, we're going back 10 years, almost exactly. So there may be some details in my memory that aren't exact. But my general knowledge of that was that the doctors from the prosecution side were the actual doctors that examined the baby. I know there was a Dr. Moak. He was in the emergency room at the time. Dr. Ham, I believe, must have examined the baby at some point in time. I don't recall the names of the other doctors, but I believe that they were the ones that were actually present while all of this was going on, ran the tests, examined the baby. So I felt that they were more credible just based on that.
So you go back into the jury room. There's how many jurors? 12?
12, and then we had extra. I don't know what you call that, but there's
They call that an alternate.
Yes, thank you.
Just in case one of you gets sick, one of you doesn't show up.
And that did end up happening. The alternate did drop out way towards the end of the 4 weeks.
How many days did you guys deliberate?
2.
And so the first go round, when the jurors go around and vote, how many guilty votes were there?
That is a great question. I'm almost positive it was 3 guilty, 2 not guilty, and the rest undecided.
Wow.
They just all said, I have no clue if this person is innocent or guilty. That was the general consensus.
Now, you mentioned Julie testified this time.
Yes, and I hear that's very uncommon, but I don't have enough knowledge of trials to know that that's really true.
Right.
And I took a lot of notes during these 4 weeks, and I regret, they said we could keep them at the end of the trial. I regret not doing that. They were just shredded or destroyed. And I remember her testifying, and I was taking my notes, and someone looked right at her and said, did you commit this crime? Did you abuse this child? And I was so busy taking my notes, I didn't look up into her face. And I always wished that I would have, and she said no. I remember hearing that and just wished I would have had that visual connection with what I was hearing.
You think that maybe you would have given it more credit?
Maybe I just could have seen a little bit more past my own opinion at that point of whether or not she was innocent or guilty.
So, Sarah, we know your ultimate verdict was not guilty.
Yes.
Take us through the 2 days. I mean, how did you? And just for those of you who don't know, all 12 have to agree, which is not an easy thing, and especially on the count you just told me. I mean, because that's a pretty, I've heard stories 10-2, 11-1. I've never heard it as kind of off skew as what you just described. So tell me how you guys all got to 12 not guilty.
Yes. So the 3 of us who felt she was guilty, and I'm pretty sure it was 3. I can think of the other 2 people in my head. It was very difficult to articulate, yes, she's just guilty. The 2 people that initially believed she was innocent was a nurse and a minister at a local church. And I volunteered to be the jury foreman, and I was just kind of going with the flow. I didn't have a plan. I watched 12 Angry Men during the trial just out of curiosity to see what happens in a jury room. I heard it was a good movie. It was. And I said, okay, well, let's do that thing where everybody just kind of goes around and anonymously writes down their vote, innocent, guilty, or undecided. And that was where we got those numbers. So once we realized what we were dealing with, then I kind of opened up the table to discuss this, and nobody wanted to say anything. It was a very tense silence. But the silence was finally broken by the nurse who said she was innocent. So while we're all sitting there holding our breath, like, what do we do now? She said, there's no way she abused that baby. And I was surprised. I thought we were going to go in there and all say that she was guilty and there wouldn't be a lot of discussion about it. So the nurse started going into more of the medical aspect of it, which is, I think, where a lot of us were really stuck. It was difficult to make heads or tails of 2 different sets of doctors saying 2 very different things. So she broke the silence and said, let me tell you why this child was not abused. And that at least got the discussion going.
And then it took 2 days to convince everybody.
Yes. And the minister, we were a really good group. We were very personable. We got along. We talked. The minister, during the 4-week trial, kind of kept to himself, didn't really say a whole lot, but when it came time to deliberate, he also really stepped up and had a lot of input on why he believed that she was innocent. And I readily admit to being one of those people who said, oh, well, she's on trial, she must have done something wrong, or, well, she was the last one that the baby was with and he was fine. And it was the minister that really challenged my way of thinking on that and said, well, your son was probably the last person that you were with. Does that mean that you abused him if something were to happen to him just because you're his primary caregiver and you were the last person to see him this morning or whatever? Does that mean you're guilty of something?
Interesting.
No, it does not.
So you came to the verdict and you all were confident at that point?
Well, the first day, we all agreed that we weren't ready to make this decision yet. We had kind of swayed back and forth. There were still several people who were just like, I don't know. So we all went home. We slept on it. We went back. We really needed that second day to deliberate. And ultimately, Mike, the not verdict decision was based on the fact that we could all agree on one thing. We could all agree that there was reasonable doubt.
That's all you got to agree on.
That was it.
That's all you got to agree on. I mean, that's the beautiful thing about the system.
Yes.
It's not, you're never going to know anything 100%, right?
Right.
I don't know if that's a black sweater you're wearing 100%, right?
It might be dark blue.
It might be dark blue. It might be a different shade of black, right? We could agree, disagree. But, you're never going to be 100% on anything. That's why, but reasonable doubt is there for this particular reason, to prevent bad things from happening.
Yes, and that's what 12 people agreed on in Julie's case. Now, the flip side of that is I feel like it's got to be really hard for Julie she's a free person now, but I mean, it's got to be difficult to say, okay, well, I was exonerated from this case, but it's not a situation where like DNA evidence proved that someone else did this or you're fully vindicated. I would think that it would be very challenging to go around emotionally feeling like there was still a stigma on you or that some people believe that you could have done that. Being honest, so there were some jury members that really weren't sure but agreed on reasonable doubt.
You said at the beginning, just because she was charged, you thought she was guilty.
I admit it, but I will
How
also
bad
say,
is that? Everybody
well,
out there listening and hearing should just because somebody's charged or accused doesn't mean anything.
No. But I think that the others that also felt that she was guilty kind of came from that same mindset, which of course is difficult to change in a person.
Yeah.
We're all adults. I was in my 30s during the trial. The two of them were 40s, 50s maybe. I mean, to be able to change someone's way of thinking like that is extremely difficult, but this absolutely changed the way that I think.
So, Sarah, if somebody's listening and they're about to be called for jury duty or they're about to sit on a jury, what's your message for them?
Well, I think that we take a lot of our own biases with us to trials. And I know it's so difficult to put those biases aside because they're things that we live with every day. They may not even be something you perceive as a negative bias, but it is a bias. When I was listening to Dr. Ham speak, he was so intelligent, he was so knowledgeable. There's nothing wrong with that, but in a way I felt like it biased me towards his opinion. He was so confident. So if there is a way to kind of search inside yourself and set those biases aside and at least open your mind to the possibility of reasonable doubt to hear both sides of the story, I think that's all you really need.
I think that is well said. I can only imagine how it felt to hear not guilty the second time. I mean, tell me how it felt.
Oh, I remember. I was absolutely. I was terrified. I was terrified because I was having flashbacks from the first trial, and despite the fact that I had a dream team, and I had all of this, supporting evidence and testimony favoring me and whatnot. And finally, I was able to share my side of the story and everything. You just don't know what that verdict is going to be. Obviously, the first time around, I expected it to be not guilty. I mean, I was going to take my nephew to the movies that night. How am I going anywhere? When the not guilty verdict came back, came back at 9 o'clock in the morning, very early. But I remember I dressed for jail because it's cold in there. So I made sure I was going to have warm socks. I made sure I was going to have the proper undergarments. I was not going to experience what I experienced the first time going in there, where they take you from everything. So,
Gives me chills just hearing that. That is so sad.
So when they said not guilty, I remember I had an audible sigh, and I remember just I started crying. You know, I was just like, it was like just relief, absolute relief. Wow. And
did that apology ever come from Eric Smith?
No, I never received an apology from anybody except Judge Baronet. After they went into the jury room to talk to the jurors, Baronet came down, and he was still in his robe, and he said, "I just want to shake your hand." He said, "For the past several years, I have not been able to sleep thinking about this case." And he said, "And I'm so glad that they finally got it right." Wow. And
he expressed that to the jury after the trial was over as well. He was very personable with us. He told us he believed we made the right decision. He even took us around into his chambers and showed us around some of his personal items he had in the office.
What did you think? So after that, you guys must have then were like, you got to have been proud of yourself.
Well, I felt validated for sure. And over the years, I've had a few people approach me that say, "Hey, I saw you on TV. I think that she was innocent. You made the right decision." And that was really powerful to hear, years later. And when the trial was over, Carl Marlinga invited several of the jurors out to lunch to discuss the case. Nobody wanted to go. Nobody wanted to talk to the media. And I'm like, how can you not want to talk about this?
Sarah had a spiritual experience too, though.
Yes. When I went on that trial, I certainly didn't have any faith in God. That was something that I had lost a long time ago along the way. And going through all of this and seeing all these things unfold and getting to know Julie revitalized my faith in a higher power.
Good
Definitely. That was something I didn't have until the trial was over.
Right?
That's beautiful. So how did you guys hook up?
So when Carl invited the jurors out to lunch, I'm like, heck yeah, I want to go. I've been holding this in for a month because you're not allowed to talk about it with your family. You can't talk about it in the jury room.
So this is after the trial. This is after,
yes.
a month later. He sent you an email.
No, that day, the day of.
Oh, that day.
Yeah, the day the trial was over, not during, the day it was
Obviously.
over, and
You all
she
went to
was
lunch.
found innocent. He invited anyone in the jury out to lunch. He wanted to talk about the trial, and I readily volunteered, and I was very honest with him. I said, "Carl, I thought your defense was kind of weak. There were some things that you did." I gave him specific examples that I felt really weren't helping your case at all. And I said, even though Carl Marlinga is one of those people that I tend to favor because he's intelligent, he's competent, he's competent, I'm drawn to people like that, I still wasn't buying his defense.
Wow. And did he laugh or did he take it?
He wanted me to be honest. And I, again, gave him several examples of why I felt the defense was weak when he was cross-examining the doctors and things. He kept bringing up childhood stroke, and he had presented some articles, just as one example, about strokes. And I specifically remember the doctor looking at the article that Carl Marlinga was presenting saying, "This is an article in Diabetic Men. What does this have to do with a childhood stroke?" And I thought, wow, he's really reaching on the stroke thing.
So that day, that lunch was 10 years ago tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
October 15th, 2010. Tomorrow's October 15th, 2020. Happy Happy 10 years of freedom.
Thank you. It has not been easy. I still get that stigma to this day.
I can't imagine.
People still think I abuse.
Do you have any updates on Philip?
No, I have not had any. I have not. During the before the second trial started, I went ahead and I invited outside of the earshot of the jurors. It was myself, Carl, the prosecutor, and the adoptive mother. We were all in the courtroom, and through Carl, I gave her a CD of photos because, mind you, I was taking pictures of him every day. There was photos that she didn't have of him. So I said, I want to give you, these photos, and I invite you to sit in on the trial because I want you to hear everything. I want you to know everything. And I hope that at the end, when the truth comes out for you to accept, that we can form some type of bridge between the two families, because not only did I lose a son/nephew, but my parents lost a grandson, my siblings lost a nephew, my nephew's nieces lost a cousin, et cetera, et cetera. You can just go down the line. So I said, if maybe we can have some type of bridge, so maybe during a holiday or a Christmas or like a birthday, we can, do something. She just said, let's talk at the end of the trial. The not guilty. Now, every day before the trial started, I would be in my position, she would be in her position, and we would nod to each other. We wouldn't say anything else, but we would always nod to each other, and this is before they would bring the jury in. So the day that the verdict came back not guilty, and I became emotional, but after I composed myself, I felt like a little kid, like, ooh, like, we won, Mommy. I mean, something weird, like, I was just excited, and I turned to her like a little kid, like, yeah, we did it. And she just wouldn't look at me. She was looking stone, like, just, she had a blank expression, and she was looking straight forward. After that, she and her husband were let out of the courtroom by ways of the back door. They didn't want to be, bothered by anybody. Right. But in the paper the next day, there was a quote that she had basically had said, so something to the effect of, if Julie's innocent or guilty, nonetheless, it doesn't matter to us. We know that our sweet Benjamin, they renamed him Benjamin, that our sweet Benjamin, is something that, we're going to take him home. And it wasn't favorable. It wasn't favorable. It wasn't favorable. I can't remember the exact quote, but I remember confronting Carl Marlinga with that article. And I said, hey, right in front of you, I thought that she and I were having a good rapport. And he said, Julie, you have to understand that from the time that Philip was 5 weeks on, and they were fostering, or like 5 or after he was in the hospital for a couple of weeks, so maybe 8 or 9 weeks on, they were fostering him. And they were being told by medical staff and people in the police and the prosecutor is that this was a child who was abandoned, and that the mother was suspected of abusing the child. So this is all that they know. And then, of course, they're going to join their support groups of SBS and blah, blah, blah.
Whoa.
So
and they don't want to give you back the baby.
Well, I had 5. I mean,
right? Well, think about it. If you were
he was 7 years old by that time. He only knew at 5 weeks. That would be cruel for me to do that. Take him from his environment. But I wanted a relationship. I wanted, you know what I'm saying? And it's like she just completely took that away from me, and that haunts me every day.
So there's been no run-ins with them since?
No.
And I do recall what you were saying about her being in the paper and saying something unfavorable. I remember a lot of little articles in newspapers, and I remember some of them not getting the facts quite right, and I remember some of them taking things out of context. So it's so good that you have these dialogues, Mike, because I think really these types of conversations are where you really get down to the bottom of the truth and what really happened. I don't think those newspaper articles did Julie any justice, and I think that's got to be true for other people, not just Julie.
Are you holding out any hope that after he turns 18, he might look you up?
I don't know what his level of his functioning level is on this,
We know nothing.
I don't know anything.
So sorry to hear that. And how is your sister doing?
She's done a 360 for years. She's been on the straight and narrow, but there's a little tension between us by way of she's got a lot of guilt because she realizes that she made a lot of errors where she could have assisted me, before the first trial and even during the first trial. We're cordial. Everybody's cordial. And you can't really take things back.
Right. And, as people know from our prior podcasts, one of the things that I didn't know as a lawyer until I started doing these type of podcasts and getting to know people like yourself and Kenny and Aaron and others, that, and this to me is one of the craziest things in our legal system, is that if you get convicted of a crime and you go to prison and you get out, you're a parolee. And you have medical benefits and housing benefits and assistance in getting a job and on and on and on.
Right.
If you go to prison and they find out you're not guilty, if they find out that they wrongfully incarcerated you either by DNA or by your type of situation, you're a free person, but you get nothing.
Right.
No benefits. No, you're not a parolee. You don't get housing support. You don't get money. You don't get counseling. You get nothing.
That's something that we're trying to change.
Well, let me know how that's going and let me know if I can help in any way, because I think
Sure.
that's one of the most inequitable things I've ever heard. Kenny's talked to me about it and others have talked to me about it.
Are you familiar with Valerie Newman?
Yes, she's
Give
the one
her a
running.
call.
She's
Yeah.
the one running the
integrity
unit
I
in Wayne
just
County.
met with her last evening with a group of exonerees because we're trying to
Pass some laws.
we're trying to get things like 10 years ago when I came home, it took 12 acts of Congress to get my ID. There was a gentleman last evening, home 12 days, and he's still going through, I can't get an ID
Doesn't
because
make
I either
any
need a
sense.
birth certificate or they should have already had this 10 years later.
We need to fix the system.
Absolutely.
And I know I probably have another 100 questions for you. Maybe we'll do this again. But I've kept you well over an hour and a half. Thank you both for being here.
Anything to educate the public.
I'm so sorry you went through this, Julie, and thank you for sharing the story in such detail. I wish you only the best of luck, and I hope that one day you can put this past you, because nobody should go through what you went through.
Thank you.
And Sarah Miller, thank you for doing the right thing on that jury.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And I really enjoyed hearing your side of things, and thank you both for coming on Open Mic.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for watching Open Mic with Julie Baumer, and we had Sarah Miller, who was the jury foreman on the second trial. Heartbreaking story. Really hard to hear the story. It's another one of those sad breakdown in the systems that as a lawyer, it's just infuriating that first lawyer didn't get it right, didn't bother to get medical experts. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends, subscribe somewhere on this page, like it, comment, and keep in touch. And thanks for watching and supporting Open Mic.